Let's talk about the weird and creepy world of psychology. You've probably heard the Stanford Prison Experiment or Milgram's shock test, but what about the experiments that nobody talks about? The ones that are so bizarre, they'll make your jaw drop. I've got 10 creepy psychological experiments you've probably never heard of. Let's jump right in. 1. The Monster Study. In 1939, psychologist Wendell Johnson and his student Mary Tudor wanted to see if they could make kids stutter. They took 22 orphan children and split them into two groups. One group got positive feedback like, "You're such a great speaker." The other group, they were told they were terrible at speaking, even if they weren't. Over time, the kids in the negative group started stuttering for real. Some of them never recovered, and they carried that trauma for the rest of their lives. The study was so unethical, it was kept secret for decades. That's why it's called the Monster Study. It's a monster of an experiment. 2. The Aversion Project. During apartheid in South Africa, the government wanted to cure homosexuality. Psychologist Aubrey Levin led a program that used electroshock therapy and chemical castration on gay men. Men were strapped to chairs, given drugs, and shocked with electricity while being shown pictures of other men. The goal? To make them associate their feelings with pain. Thousands of men went through this, and many were left with lifelong trauma. Levin eventually fled to Canada, but the damage was done. This experiment is a chilling reminder of how far people will go to enforce their prejudices, even under the guise of science. 3. Little Albert. In 1920, psychologist John B. Watson wanted to prove that fear could be learned. He took a 9-month-old baby, little Albert, and showed him a white rat. At first, Albert loved the rat. But then, Watson would slam a metal bar behind Albert's head every time he touched the rat. Bang! The poor baby would scream and cry. Soon, Albert was terrified of the rat and anything fluffy, like rabbits, dogs, and even Santa Claus. Watson never helped Albert get over his fears, and nobody knows what happened to him. This experiment is a heartbreaking example of how far some scientists were willing to go. 4. Operation Midnight Climax. In the 1950s, the CIA was obsessed with mind control. They wanted to know if drugs like LSD could be used to brainwash people. So, they set up secret safe houses in San Francisco and New York. They hired prostitutes to lure men into these houses, where they were drugged without their knowledge. The CIA watched them through two-way mirrors to see how they reacted. The program was eventually shut down, but it's still one of the most unethical experiments in history. Imagine being drugged and spied on. Creepy, right? 5. The Pit of Despair. In the 1970s, psychologist Harry Harlow wanted to study depression. He used baby monkeys for his experiments, isolating them in tiny dark chambers for weeks. The monkeys had no light, no toys, and no interaction, just complete loneliness. The results were heartbreaking. The monkeys became severely depressed. Some stopped eating and just gave up. Harlow's experiments showed how important love and connection are for mental health, but the cost was way too high. It's called the Pit of Despair for a reason. It's a dark, dark chapter in psychology. 6. The Third Wave. In 1967, high school teacher Ron Jones wanted to show his students how easily people fall into fascism. He created a fake movement called the Third Wave and convinced his students it was real. Within days, students were reporting on each other, enforcing strict rules, and even wearing uniforms. It got so out of hand, Jones had to shut it down after just 5 days. The experiment showed how quickly people can be manipulated into following authority, even in a democratic society. It's a chilling lesson in the power of groupthink. 7. The David Reimer Case. In the 1960s, a baby boy named David Reimer was raised as a girl after a botched circumcision. Psychologist John Money claimed it proved gender was a social construct, but David suffered immensely. He was bullied, confused, and traumatized. As a teenager, David learned the truth and transitioned back to living as a male. Sadly, he struggled with depression and eventually took his own life. The experiment was a tragic failure, and a stark reminder of the dangers of unethical research. It's a heartbreaking story that still resonates today. 8. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study. From 1932 to 1972, researchers in Alabama conducted one of the most infamous medical experiments in history. They studied the effects of untreated syphilis on 600 black men without their consent. The men were told they were receiving free health care, but in reality, they were being left to suffer. Even after penicillin became a widely available cure in the 1940s, the researchers withheld treatment. Many men died, and others passed the disease to their families. The study only ended after a whistleblower exposed it in 1972. The Tuskegee study is a horrifying example of medical racism and the devastating consequences of unethical research. It's a dark chapter that still impacts trust in medicine today. 9. The Landis Facial Expressions Experiment. In the 1920s, psychologist Carney Landis wanted to study human emotions. He recruited participants and made them do increasingly bizarre and disturbing tasks while photographing their facial expressions. Participants were asked to smell ammonia, look at pornographic images, and even decapitate live rats. Yeah, you heard that right. Decapitate rats. The experiment didn't reveal much about emotions, but it left participants traumatized. Landis's methods were shocking and unethical, even for the time. This experiment is a bizarre and unsettling reminder of how far some researchers will go in the name of science or curiosity. 10. The Soviet Sleep Experiment. Okay, this one might be more urban legend than fact, but it's still creepy. The story goes that in the late 1940s, Soviet researchers wanted to test the limits of human endurance. They kept 5 political prisoners awake for 15 days using an experimental stimulant gas. At first, the prisoners were fine, but as the days went on, they started hallucinating, screaming, and even tearing their own skin off. By the end, the researchers opened the chamber to find one prisoner dead and the others begging to be released. Whether it's true or not, the Soviet sleep experiment is a chilling tale that blurs the line between science and horror. It's the stuff of nightmares. These experiments were conducted in the name of science, but they left behind a legacy of ethical nightmares. Today, stricter guidelines protect human and animal subjects from such extreme studies. But the question remains, how far are we willing to go to uncover the mysteries of the human mind? Which of these experiments shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more crazy facts, don't forget to like and subscribe.